Good morning, and we are live. Coffee with Rich. Got a really great guest this morning, man. It's May the 26th. It's a Friday morning up here on the plateau. The sun is out. I'm drinking my coffee, and I'm really excited to have Todd Fox on the show here in just a second. I'm going to ask Todd if he will introduce himself to the audience. But before I do, let's do a comms check. Make sure everything is working. I got the notification. I'm live. That's sweet. Thank you to everybody that's going to join us live this morning. And thank you to everyone that'll watch the replay in the days and weeks to come. And everybody that'll watch on YouTube and listen to us on the podcast today. Got a really interesting show for you. I'm very excited. If you're just jumping on, please like and share. You're definitely going to want to check this out. If you're a coin member of the American Warrior Society, please tell me your coin number and where you're from this morning. I'd love to know that. And if you don't know what a coin number is, please check out the AmericanWarriorSociety.com for all your self-defense training needs. We've got everything from low light, rifle, shotgun, handgun, combatives, less lethal, how to clear a structure, one-man, two-man vehicle tactics. We got everything for you. Check us out, AmericanWarriorSociety.com. And let me introduce my guest, man. Todd is a former Marine, law enforcement officer, BJJ black belt under Hickson Gracie, executive protection specialist, former MMA fighter, and new author of the amazing book, Protection for and from Humanity. Just finished it last night. Amazing book. We'll talk more about it later. After leaving the Marines, Todd began his executive protection career. Todd has operated around the world, providing security and protection to some of the most recognized names in the music and movie industry, including Guy Ritchie, Madonna, Motley Crue, Tool, you name it. Todd has probably protected them at some point or another. Todd, good morning, sir.
Good morning, Rich.
Great to have you, brother.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I've been excited, man, to get you on. I saw you on Cleared Hot, man, and your stilted Brazilian accent is probably second to none, man.
It's funny. That's the takeaway from that interview is my Brazilian accent.
Yeah. I was like, dude, that sounds just like Henzo. I can't believe it. It's freakish.
I tell you what, it's all those years of being exposed to all those guys, but my special accent is Rodrigo Vaghi. I have that one down.
Can we hear some of it this morning, I hope?
Well, buddy, what do you want to hear? Okay, Rich. Very good, buddy. Very good. Let's talk, buddy.
You know, that's funny. The way you were on the show, you were like, I like the Brazilians because they remind me of like Scots Irish, from the hills of East Tennessee. One little slight could be like, hey, you got a problem? We're ready to jump off.
They know it's all love. I talked to Rodrigo about that. And ironically, some of the guys that haven't trained in many years saw that podcast and came back to the gym and were sitting around laughing and talking about it and saying that the memory of that accent and motivating them and telling them what to do and stuff brought them back because they wanted to experience the feeling again. So Rodrigo knows it's all love. It's not making fun of him. Unfortunately, he's lost a lot of his Brazilian accent and all the words that he used to use, like armpits used to be arm pivots. Oh, buddy, gonna be in your put the foot in the arm pivot, buddy. Like, well, arm pivot. Okay, sure. And now that's gone away over the years. He's learned too much English. And so, yeah, it's all good. It's in fun. They can poke fun at me too.
Oh, yeah, man. I love it. I couldn't imagine trying to speak Portuguese. They would laugh me out of the dojo. How is your Portuguese, Todd?
Ugly. So Portuguese in Brazil is very different from Portuguese in Portugal. And I'm a Spanish speaker. So it's very similar. You can understand a lot of the words. They can understand your Spanish. In Portugal, it's much easier. In Brazil, they have the Afro kind of Cuban influence Portuguese. And so they sing and they cut their words. So they'll cut the words in half and they'll string them together as if it was a song. Like, porra, feia de cara, boa de bunda, Raimunda, fala sério. And it's a very different Portuguese from in Portugal. In Portugal, I do pretty good. In Brazil, it's a little bit hard. It's mostly slang.
Yeah, I love it. Let's welcome some of the folks on the show this morning. Tiny is joining us from Brunswick, Georgia. Dan is on from Flowery Branch, Georgia. Alan is on from Occupied, Virginia. Jason is on. Vinny is on. JD is on. Will, Gerald, a lovely bride, Miss Lisa. Good morning, ma'am. How are you? Guile from the Philippines. Ted is on. Jara, Paul, Good morning. Please like and share. Uh, Paul, good morning, brother. Jera, good morning. Todd, I wanted you to tell us a little bit about yourself, brother, before we get into the show.
You did a pretty good job on the intro. I'm a former Marine, former cop. I'm a BJJ black belt. I train Muay Thai. Hello, Patrick Christie. And for the last 25-ish years, I've been doing protective services, from executives and celebrities to some higher profile dignitaries. I run a company. I run several companies, but the main one that's probably notable for the general public is one that protects rock stars doing concerts, or actors doing films on location. And then, as you noted, I wrote another book recently called Protection from Humanity. And we have a civilian training program that we just opened up last year. So we've been training military and law enforcement for many, many years in the region that you are in. And last year we decided to open up a program on kind of ways to think, ways to look at things, ways to approach it. Classroom and Prac app that's called Phase Line X. So lots going on. I mean, I think there's a lot of crossover between the two of us and probably most of your audience.
Yeah, I'm looking down the list of folks this morning. A lot of retired law enforcement, both state and federal. And yeah, glad to have you guys. And my hats off to each and every one of you joining us live this morning. Yeah, your book is really good. Like I said, I read the last chapter or two last night. And one of the things I like about it is it's so, and we'll talk more about it later, but it's so accessible. And you break down some really, which could be difficult to understand concepts and acronyms into the layperson. I would have no problem giving this to one of my, I have two daughters, Todd, giving it to one of them, and I think they would understand it really well and be safer for having read it. So good work.
That's a great compliment. Thank you for that.
Yeah. So why did you end up joining the Marine Corps, man? I'm going to dig into your background a little bit more, Todd.
Probably because I didn't want to go straight to college, and that's what obviously my parents wanted. And when I looked at it, I looked at all the branches, and when I looked at it, the Marine Corps, and still in my estimate, and I know Marines aren't necessarily the flavor of the hour, but they still have the best basic standards across the board. So, I've talked to a couple guys about this in the past. You look at their shooting standards, way better than anybody's. You look at their fitness standards, way higher than anybody's. And there's just this thing about them at the basic, most simple, basic level. All the guys are trained to be riflemen, right? Very simple concept. If something goes wrong, hey, that's your job. Get in there. I like that ethos. I like the mentality. I had a cousin at the time who was serving in Mogadishu, and he would send me letters and information and tell me stories. And I think that kind of also highlighted the Marine Corps for me. But I didn't have a father who had served. Who's a huge fan of the military, but never served. I didn't have anybody real close to me other than my cousin. But it just stood out. I mean, it stood out in a way that was different from the other branches. So it was almost a no-brainer. If I was going to do it, that was the way that I was going.
Yeah. And were you a martial artist before you joined the Marine Corps?
Yeah, I was. I was doing karate and a little bit of more like small circle, like we had talked about jujitsu, but nothing related to MMA or at the time NHB.
Okay. And then were you like the rest of us when the UFC came out? What was it, 93, 94? Just like,
Yeah,
what is this Brazilian jiu-jitsu stuff?
absolutely, 100%. Yeah, bare knuckle karate. You think, and this is it, and this is obviously different from what I was doing in the Marine Corps by mandate, which was the linear infighting neuro override engagement, or line training. But what the hell is this thing? How is this guy beating these people? And how odd or weird is it that this guy's fighting off his back? That's where you don't want to be. So it was weird, and that drew my attention for sure.
Yeah, I remember watching one of the early UFCs at the dojo I was training at. Me and Mike Seeklander were training at Tommy's Training Center, and it was Okinawan freestyle, which was basically just like I'm trying to think, just basically bare knuckle, full contact karate,
Yeah.
and that was the thing back then. If you were man enough to do it, and then we just watched this little skinny guy, Hoist Gracie, just destroy everybody. It was just like magical.
Yes, it was hard to wrap your head around how that was occurring. And even though you could watch it happen, you still didn't really understand how he made it happen. And because jujitsu is so nuanced, it's difficult to understand that unless someone breaks it down, which is probably why, now we have these 5-minute rounds that break it apart, because it's pretty boring for people to watch something that's technical when they don't understand the techniques that are being implemented. So it was kind of that way. It was fascinating because I had never seen that before. And at the same time, I couldn't get a grasp on exactly what it was he was doing to get those wins.
Yeah. So, and then when did you get into Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, Todd?
I was on recruiting duty in St. Louis, and I was teaching karate. And lucky for me, just sheer luck, next door to the recruiting station was a jiu-jitsu school. It was the first in the Midwest. Rodrigo Vaghi, who is now a 6th-degree black belt under Hickson, was there and didn't speak much English. I was on recruiting. There was a guy named Andy Hampton that talked me into walking next door to meet him. And I walked next door and met him and was talking to him a little bit. And, he invited me to train. I said I'd come back when we weren't working. I was in uniform. And my instructor, my karate instructor, is like, yep, absolutely, unequivocally, you must go. You must train with those guys. If they're connected to the Gracie family, you don't have a choice. In fact, I can't teach you what they can teach you. So you've learned pretty much what you need to learn from me. He was a former Marine, a former cop, a guy named Martin Fosterling. And he was a great coach, and he sent me in the right path and said, hey, take your time, spend it with them, right? Don't worry about coming to class, go to their class, learn what they have. And if there's stuff that's translatable for us, bring it back to us. So that was a very unique thing at that time. Because if you remember, martial arts were pretty much closed. Like, this is the only way. You do this one thing, that's it. And so he kind of had a unique approach, and it worked out well for me.
Did you know from the beginning that you would when you first started training in BJJ that this was going to be the path that you were on? Was it an instant connection?
It was mainly because I was getting my ass beat, and it was like, oh my god, I'm used to beating people's asses, and now all of a sudden, left, right, everybody just taking their turn on you, and so overcoming that feeling of helplessness. I mean, that's not a good feeling to have as a grown man. Like, I can't defend myself. I can't do anything. You don't go from being a normal guy. You go from a guy who's fighting bare knuckle. You go from a guy who's in the Marine Corps. You're in smokers getting punched in the head, and you're fine. And then all of a sudden you've got kids kind of tooling you up like, whoa, how the hell did this happen? And so after you get over that, it's like, oh, this is mine. I got to learn this. But that learning curve is so steep in jujitsu.
Yeah, it is. As a matter of fact, if you want to see Todd beat the crap out of somebody, I've posted a link to and I'd like for you to introduce it's the video, Todd. It's got almost 1 million views of you, I believe, at Henzo's school in New York. And I think you tapped this guy like 10 or 12 times in 3 minutes or something.
Uh, is this the Kung Fu guy?
Yeah, the Kung Fu guy. Can you intro the video? And then please check out the link. You're going to you're really going to enjoy that. After the show's over,
Yeah.
follow the link, man.
How this video has 1 million views, I'm not exactly sure, but so I was out on the road working a protection detail for a high profile rock star. Um, and he did kung fu, and he was very passionate about kung fu, and he decided to import or bring out his instructor on the road to train him. So he's paying this guy to come out and learn. And we were in New Jersey doing an outdoor concert. It was at I think they call it the PNC Center in Homedale, New Jersey. And he brought this guy, and the guy came out. And the first meeting that I had with the guy, this individual introduced me. Hey, Joe, this is Todd. Todd's into martial arts too. So, back and forth. And we had this exchange, like a conversation. And he asked me what I did. And so I said, I mostly jujitsu. I do a lot of stuff, but mostly jujitsu. And he goes, oh, oh. And I was like, whoa, what the hell is that? And he's like, well, what you do is kind of like kindergarten, and what we do is university level. And obviously, I'm a man that rubs me the wrong way. And so from that point, I was all about testing it. And I even told him right then and there, like, oh, if that's true, let's test it. And if it's true, I'll come train with you. Obviously, I knew that wasn't the case, but you have to test it and you have to make a point. And I couldn't do anything in front of my client. So I was a little bit heated that he had said that. And I called Henzo. Henzo's a good dude, really, really good, solid dude, and said, "Hey, I got this guy who's telling me that kung fu is like kindergarten, or excuse me, jujitsu is like kindergarten, and kung fu is university level, and he said he's willing to train." And I'd just like to know if I can use your school. He's like, "Yeah, buddy, I'm gonna come pick you up." And so literally, he's telling me, I can't do it right now, Hanzo. He's gonna come pick me up. So next day he picks me up with this guy and with Holes Grease. I don't know if you know Holes. Holes is a huge dude, but so Holes pops out of the car and this guy's shitting himself. And then he realizes, oh, Gracie family, and it kind of connects with the kid. And we go to this academy in Homedale, which was one of Henzo's academy, his affiliate academy, but I believe at the time Holes owned it, if I'm not mistaken. And Henzo gives me a tour of the gym and talking whatever, and basically Henzo knows what's going to happen. And Henzo has some mercy on him. It's like, don't use closed fists, and basically take it easy. Make your point, but take it easy on him. And so, we go in there and do whatever. And he, it's ugly. It's really ugly. He doesn't know what he's doing. And, one of the ideas that these guys had is that they're going to poke eyes out and rip ears off and do all this stuff. And when you ask them, like, how many guys have you done that to? It's zero. They've never done the thing that they think they're going to do to somebody. And in reality, no matter what it is, whether it's shooting or fighting with your fist, unless you do it and you do it ad nauseum regularly, and unless you make it very simple, basic techniques that you're just replicating under different conditions, it's not real. And so that was proven over and over and over again with him in a very nice way. You don't see me elbow him. You don't see me headbutt him. You don't see me knee. Well, I need him a couple times, but relatively light. But yeah, so somehow, some way, this guy's buddy filmed it with a GoPro and then gave me the actual tape. And I'm, at the time I'd never posted anything on the internet. And I said, okay, well, this is a good lesson because there's a lot of drama back and forth between jiu-jitsu and kung fu guys, which is probably why it has 1 million views. And that's kind of how that came to be. Oddly enough, at the very end of that training session, he told Henzo that he'd like to bring his master so his master could show Henzo some stuff. So, and Henzo is so gracious. He was like, "Yeah, buddy, bring him, buddy."
So, Todd, when I heard you tell that story the first time, man, I was obviously rolling in the truck when I was listening to it driving down the road. But then the fact that this guy goes up to Henzo and says, "Hey, maybe my instructor can teach you a thing or two," is unbelievable.
The lesson was lost. Like, you think, okay, maybe you expose something to somebody new, and I know I've had to be exposed that way, where I'm not smart enough to get it the first time, and someone has to beat my ass to get my attention, and that guy just never got it. So, and I think I was asked this the last time I was asked about it, which is that interview that you mentioned, the podcast you mentioned, but my client continues to this day to train with that guy.
God, I don't get it, man.
Yeah,
I don't get it because the and I don't want to be disparaging of the guy. I don't know him obviously, but just I don't see any technique in that guy. I don't know what he's teaching
because he wasn't training in those conditions. So now all of a sudden, when someone's walking at you, you start to do this monkey looking thing, and you're not really sure when to go because you're not used to moving and fighting. And so it changes. And that's why everybody's like, that guy's never done anything. Well, actually he has. It's just that he's training in static conditions, not a guy coming at you, which is far from reality as you get. And unfortunately, and we don't have to go off on this topic, but unfortunately jiu-jitsu also is becoming akin to that, where we start to do really unnatural things that are not conducive to fighting.
Yeah, and I definitely want to dig into that because I've only been doing BJJ for about 3.5 years, and you've been doing it for decades now, Todd, and just to get your experience would be amazing. Mike Seeklander is on the show. He said, "Speaking of BJJ, I'm heading to class right now. Who's training today?" Hopefully a lot of you folks are training today. But please like and share. Got more to come with Todd. I wanted to ask, when you got into BJJ, did you know that it would be something that would lead you toward what they used to call no holds barred fighting, or what we call today MMA?
No, Probably the biggest influence on that was Rodrigo. Rodrigo was like, "But gonna fight." And there were three or four of us that were actively involved in NHB at the time. And in fact, one owns a pretty significant school in MMA called St. Charles MMA. Mike Rogers got some great fighters out of there, a bunch of UFC guys, a lot of former champs. But it was kind of like we were almost thrust into it. We chose to do it, but that was kind of the direction that things were going, and that's kind of where he led us. Um, you know, I trained to fight more with the concept of being able to protect myself and not competitively. And I went down the competitive path with BJJ and submission wrestling and what would be MMA. But that was never my goal. My goal wasn't to be a competitive fighter. But I'm very glad that I did that. I mean, that had a huge influence on me.
And if I remember correctly, Todd, you're a Pan Am champion, national champion. You've got several titles under your belt. You're a very accomplished competitor.
Yeah, U.S. Open champ, U.S. national champ. I'm a Pan Am medalist, not winner. But yeah, I competed a lot and won a ton of stuff. I can't say that. Again, I went thinking of points or winning medals because that just never really occurred to me. That wasn't a thought. But I don't know how much I'd be spending time training for competitions today. But at the time, it was a different era. If you look at competitions today, you don't see that many submissions. Back in the day, it was all about submissions. People didn't care about points.
Yeah, and I almost wish I'd go back to that, but that's a whole nother discussion.
Yeah, I think that
Elky's,
time's gone.
yeah, I hate that. Elky says no BJJ, but we'll be jamming to Tool, one of Todd's clients, at the gym shortly.
Thanks.
Yeah. Now, you were on recruiting duty in the Marine Corps, which is something that you and I have in common, Todd. And then you end up being the Hollywood liaison, or I may be missing that, misrepresenting that
No,
title.
no, yeah, it's that. Yeah, so 8411, I wasn't man enough to do what you did. I couldn't become a 12. I just didn't have what it takes. And so I ended up finding out about this job and lobbied for it. And um long story short, it's an LAPAO is actually what the location is. It's a public affairs office, but the primary function of that public affairs office in LA is to assist the motion picture industry. And so it's called the Marine Corps Motion Picture Liaison, and all the branches of the services have it. But basically, there's two officers and one enlisted Marine who essentially help DoD approved projects, which is any project that depicts the Marine Corps in a positive light. So DoD approves it, they send it to LAPAO or Motion Picture Liaison, and basically at the time what we did, and I have no idea what they do now. This is 20 years ago, but we'd scrub the script, we'd put the right vernacular in there for the words we use or how we do processes. We'd go out on set and we'd tell actors how to walk and talk and wear their medals or ribbons or hold their gun or how they would move. And either a director would like it or wouldn't like it, and would take it or wouldn't take it. But it's a pretty cool job. And I can't think of anybody I've met in the Marine Corps ever that knew that place existed.
I did, obviously, on recruiting duty, but like you said, most people have no idea. And Gilly says, or Guile says, I wonder if it's too late for a 45-year-old to learn jujitsu. What do you think, Todd?
No way. It's never too late. I got guys that I'm training with that are 70 years old. I know guys literally that are 65 that I see whooping 25-year-old guys who are fit, strong guys. The key component of jiu-jitsu is it's about leverage and angles, and it's about using your brain. And because of that, you can create a lot of advantages that you wouldn't have in other systems. Um, those components are available in other martial arts, but not the way they are in jiu-jitsu. So like I said, I train Muay Thai as well. But you're going to take a bashing. And I don't really see many 75-year-olds training Muay Thai. I see a ton of 75-year-olds training jiu-jitsu. And Master Elio was training into his 90s. Now he wasn't, having intense sparring sessions, but he was out there rolling around, moving, doing the techniques. 45, and in fact I was 45 a couple years ago, and I was rolling around with no problem. Still am. You might have to dance around some injuries every once in a while, but at the end of the day, 45, you still got 20 years, 30 years, maybe even 40 years of jiu-jitsu in you.
Absolutely. And let's see here. Gerald says, "You're young. I'm 59." Steve says, "I watched that." Steve said, "I watched that video. Todd handled that guy like airport luggage handler."
Nice.
Yeah, that's good stuff. Let's see here, Todd. I wanted to talk to you about the Hollywood liaison job is pretty intriguing to me, man. What projects did you work on? If you can share that with us.
Probably the most consistent project that was going on while I was there was a television show called Jag. It was a Belisario production, and at the time, it seemed like to me I was a Marine, so it was a big deal. I don't know what the following was like for that, and that was gone shortly thereafter. But I think they had a dozen seasons or something like that. And then after that, we did 3 or 4 kind of made for TV movies. My boss at the time was doing, uh, what was it? The Navajo Indians, the code
Oh,
guys,
Code Talker, yeah.
code talkers, Nicolas Cage and some other guys. He was up on set doing that at Point Magoo. So we had a lot of things. I ended up going to Europe and doing The Bourne Identity, which was a very cool gig to have as a kid or a young guy. But we did a lot of big projects. We did any of the Academy Awards, any of those kind of pomp and circumstance dog and pony shows, as well as representatives of the military. So it was a unique kind of surreal experience to have. Little did I know at the time, kind of the politics that were involved, between military side of things and entertainers and stuff like that. And thankfully, no one ever addressed that or approached me about that.
I can't imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, one of the things I also wanted to talk to you about is, and this is probably getting shifting gears a bit, Todd, but something that you mentioned in the book, and I believe I heard you on another show talk a little bit about it. What is the role of mindset? What role does that play in protection?
Mindset for me is mostly about a mental state, and I think Colonel Cooper talked a lot about that. But the mental state that allows you to either survive, or if you have a bad mindset, it can assist in facilitating your death. But it's getting your head right. It's having a certain approach or ethos that allows you to do something or achieve something. It's almost like a level of commitment. And from my side of things, it's about keeping that in all components of life, and training to that, to train your mind constantly. So for us, and I'm sure for you as well, mindset has a lot to do with exposure. So if you want to have a certain mindset, you expose yourself to something repeatedly across time, so that you condition or build that mindset that's needed. And I really think it's something that's developed. I don't think that everybody's born with this mindset and this is what they're capable of, and that's the limitation. I think it's absolutely positively what you develop, and there's a lot of different ways of going about it. And as you know, with the firearm side, there's a lot of different techniques and ideas and concepts in schools um, that have different mindsets, different ideas. But for me, it's the core, it's the central component.
I'm glad you said you're alluding to something, I believe, Todd, and I want to dig just a little bit below the surface on what you're saying there is, that there's a skill component and exposure component. One of the things that we used to talk about when I was stationed at Paris Island for 6 years was that recruit training. Really, one of the main things it does is it's an inoculation to interpersonal violence, because we get raw material from, an entire spectrum here in the United States. And we got to take that material, as you know, from being on recruiting duty, and turn it into a Marine. And we only have 13 weeks to do that. And I think a lot of people that have never, that I'm going to use the gentleman that you thrashed at Henzo's gym. You can presume one thing about your mindset, and until you are baptized with reality, you really don't know. What do you think?
I agree with you 100%. That's just a fact. And I think that's true in all walks of life, but especially when you start talking about combat or combat sports or any type of combat application. Real quick, when you start talking about stress, and everybody is subject to some degree of stress, and what stresses them may be different, but stress is experienced by the individual, and what creates that stress for the individual. So the short of what we're talking about is you have to have exposures, you have to have these extreme situations, especially for being able to replicate an idea, a concept, a technique under immense stress. And so pressure testing is essential. It's essential in fighting. It's essential with Marines, because ultimately the goal of making or forging that Marine is to make him a war fighter. And if he folds immediately under pressure, he's not going to be a war fighter. And the result is other people will unnecessarily die because of that. And so, like you're talking about at Paris Island, we got to test them, and everything's got to be done under pressure. It can be in the Marine Corps, it can be law enforcement, defensive tactics, it can be competitive martial arts, combat sports, but everything requires testing under pressure. It could be talking on an interview. If I'm an eloquent speaker privately, the two of us can have a conversation, but then we turn the camera on, we go live, and all of a sudden I fall apart because of some type of public speaking stress. I need to practice that. And so I do it through, incremental exposures over time. And then at the end of 2 or 3 years, I have a product that I'm looking for, which is the ability to speak on camera. Not in my case. I still can't speak on camera.
You're doing a fantastic job of it this morning. I wanted to talk about, one of the things you said, you made an analogous to shooting with the mindset thing. And we see this often where somebody comes to train and they've got this amazing $3,000 race gun and they can't operate it at all. They can barely hit the target. And when I go to them and try to provide a little coaching on the line, well, I need to get this new trigger. I'm like, no, no. Matter of fact, stop spending money. And I think the confusion is, you can't buy skill. You're going to have to really work at it and work at it and work at it. I think they think that I can go out and buy whatever Todd's using or Mike Seeklander's using, and I'm going to be at that level. If I wear the gi that Todd's wearing, man, show you roll or whatever you're wearing, I'm going to be that guy. And it's just not the case, man. I don't think. I mean, I think that if you're at your level or some other champion's level, you can buy a little bit of edge on performance by tweaking a few things, but you cannot buy skill. What are your thoughts?
You're on the money. Now, if you want to buy something, you can buy my services and then you can have all my skills. But the idea that you're going to buy a gun and produce the same thing, or put on a gi and produce some higher level, it makes no sense. And one of the things you mentioned is show your role. Great gi, great company, but I don't need any specific type of gi to function. It's more important, kind of the cut, to figure out what the restriction is on me, the length of it. Now, if you're competing, that all gets checked and all that good stuff. But at the end of the day, it really doesn't have much of an impact on my performance with respect to jiu-jitsu, nor do my Muay Thai shorts. They don't really allow me to be good or not good. Same with my gloves, boxing gloves. So, I know gear is a big thing. It's a marketing thing. Guys make a lot of money off it. And yes, at the highest level, it will make a difference. All the little bits and pieces add up and it changes it. But now you're talking about parts per million. And that's not really what my focal point is in what I do. And I think most of the people, if they're starting out, it's a waste of time and money. But you're right. Guys buy something, expect that all of a sudden they're going to have this increased performance. And that's just not reality. I know people don't want to hear that. I know people are selling a lot of different things, and marketing's kind of taken over in this realm, but I agree with you 100%. It's not the gear, it's the person, and it's the training the person's had and the exposures they've had, and then the real world conditions and environments they've had. And it's across time. None of this is in one day or 1 week or not even 1 year. It's across a lifetime.
Mm-hmm. But if you do want to go out and buy an American Warrior Society rash guard, I'm happy to sell you one. Check out the link below, and you can
I'll
get
buy one to support you, buddy.
Todd, I'll send you one.
Thank you.
When we get done today. Hey, I wanted to talk to you about violence, man. As a Marine, as a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, as a Leo, as an executive protection guy, you've obviously used some form of state-sanctioned violence professionally. And I just wanted to ask you, in your opinion, having been a practitioner of it, what is violence?
Well, violence typically is referred to as kind of the use of physical force against somebody to achieve a specific objective. And obviously, there's a lot of different sorts of violence, some with objectives, some without objectives. And then even how they classify violence further, what that objective is. So if it's an ideology based violence, then it's caused or used to cause fear. It's terrorism, and we can break it down into many different components. But ultimately, just like in use of force, typically violence is utilized by most people to change behavior, right? To change the behavior of the person they're using violence against. And so for me, and I've talked about this a few times, but violence isn't always wrong. There are a lot of cases where violence is required to make something right, and that's not always the case. There's crime for the most part is unnecessarily and wrong violence, in my opinion. But sometimes correcting that is using violence in a way that stops bad things from happening. So, um, violence, generally speaking, and I've talked about this as well, it's not really hated. It's violence that's out of context that people hate. And you see people watching violent movies and playing violent video games, and kids even, going through the motions of violence with another kid, not actually hurting them. It's part of our culture. It's part of who we are. It's part of the animal kingdom when you look at kind of how things survive. Whether it's predator prey or any other format, but violence is natural. It's a state, and I think practicing for violence is a really good thing so that you don't become a victim of violence. And that's pretty much where we're at. We're practicing it so that we don't have to become a victim. Is that kind of where you're going with respect to violence in general, or you have a specific topic on violence?
No, 100%, Todd. I think that I hate to phrase it this way, but I think violence gets a bad rap because I think it is morally ambiguous. Like you said, you alluded to, it can be used as a tool for good. It doesn't have to be all bad all the time. Like I remember, not to get political, but one of the candidates was pressed during the run up to the election. Will you denounce BLM and Antifa? And this person who's now the president of the United States said, which I thought was odd, I denounce violence in all its forms. And I went, man, that's a little short sighted for a man that wants to be commander in chief. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's interesting because when you look at that, the actions weren't congruent with the words in that case, because that individual bombed Syria right after going into office. And so that, I would say, a bombing is violence. And I don't know, because I'm not involved in this particular instance, but I would assume it's in alignment with something to achieve a greater, bigger objective. I don't know whether it was, right or wrong. I'm not sure, because don't have the information, but certainly there are times where we should use violence, and violence is unfortunately the solution to the problem. Again, context is everything. Context is everything in life, but in particular with violence.
Yeah, and I would say, as an executive protection guy, your job is not to tangle with anybody. A matter of fact, perhaps, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but if you end up doing that, you've probably failed.
Yeah, that's a no-go. So for us, if think about it, if it's just one-on-one, if I'm protecting someone and somebody runs up to attack my client, and I'm sitting there punching, kicking, whatever, and their buddy grabs my client and throws him in a van and takes off, I've just lost, right? So our goal is not to engage. And in fact, if we're never in the fight, we win 100% of the time. Even when we win fights or some type of contact or engagement, whether it's a fist fight or a gunfight, somebody loses or both parties lose. In our case, a lot of times it's a civil suit. Even when you win the civil suit, you lost the money. So it's the last option for us. We'd prefer not to go where problems exist. That doesn't always work out. We prefer to leave as soon as we start seeing signs of problems. So we talk about situational awareness. Okay, that doesn't make sense. That's outside the norm here, and that coupled with this and this, those things are telling me where this is going. Let's GTFO, get out of here. And we don't want to be here when this thing explodes. And then obviously the last thing is to stay and have that violence and defend ourselves when we can't leave by our own free will and accord.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I really liked about your book, because I don't know if you've read Pat McNamara's book, The Sentinel.
I haven't. Are you recommending it?
I mean, love Pat Mack, respect your brother. I mean, obviously, a retired Delta operator, but his book was supposed to be very similar to yours. But I think I'll go on record. I think yours is much, much better because there's a lot of things. So his book is how to be the agent in charge of your own executive protection, but it does not give you a lot of the tools that you do in your book. I mean, it's a lot of like how to get fit, how to shoot, and stuff like this. But this is like there's maps in here on how to do some pre planning and stuff like that you really don't find in other books of this nature.
Yeah, I don't know his book, and obviously the guy's got a great history in terms of service. But the thing is, for me, I was writing to the general public who don't have the experience or the exposure to these things, and I'm trying to think through how do I simplify this so that it can apply to many different realms. Um, and so that's what I was working off of. What systems existed in the military and law enforcement and executive protection that will be applied to the protection of a person's house or them in a car or them on vacation in a foreign country. And so I think that's kind of what you're speaking to. We kind of take a very simple, basic, common sense approach. Here are the ideas, here are the concepts, and here are some examples of how that might be done. One of the things I see now, and I, we're both to some degree involved in it, is a ton of MMA training, a ton of firearms training. And what I tried to speak to, and we do this in our training, Phase Line X, is the process, the idea, the overview, the concept, because you don't need a million different techniques. You just need to understand how the machine works. And that's also true in fighting. If you think about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, really you can have a million moves, but you don't need them. You just need to understand how the body works and where you should be and where you shouldn't be, and then how to manipulate them or get them to act in a certain way that yields the outcome you want. If somebody's on the ground and I want to keep them on the ground, I need to make sure they can't turn into me. So I control their far hip, I control their far shoulder, I control their head with a crossface or something like that. And that prevents them from turning into me, but it doesn't prevent them from turning away from me. So then if I want to control that, I might start to pull an element toward me. At the same time, I'm driving, let's say if I pull their leg toward me, their far leg, and I drive their head away from me, now I'm tacoing them, right? Because I'm turning one thing one way and turning another thing another way, and it's going to be difficult, if not impossible, for them to come into me or go away from me, which then allows me to go into the next move and initiate it. And in the process, I'm creating the stress on that person, and that stress is going to make them have bad decisions. So, in the book, really, whether you're looking at it from a protective standpoint or kind of a life security standpoint or even a fighting standpoint, those general principles should be able to translate. At least that's my goal.
No, and yeah, I think you did an outstanding job. Dr. T.C. Fuller, retired FBI agent, is on this morning. Good morning, Dr. Fuller. He says, and of course, Dr. Fuller does a lot of EP stuff himself. He says, violence is simply a tool like a hammer. Sometimes it's the right tool, sometimes it's not. Discernment is critical.
Yes.
Yeah, well said. Always succinct. Now, let's talk about tour protection. How did you end up in that, Todd?
So I was in LA at the Motion Picture Liaison, and I was doing security mostly for executives going down to Mexico on vacation or doing a business trip. And at some point in time, I had a film director who, we had a lot of film directors, but I had a relatively well-known one come in to train at Hickson's, and he was looking to do more of kind of an MMA focused training, not just straight jujitsu. And he had a bare knuckle karate background, and interesting guy. And at some point during that time, he was taking privates from me, and he ended up dating Madonna and then marrying Madonna and having a kid with Madonna. And that kind of is the transition from executive side to entertainment side. And that was Guy Ritchie. So that's what took me there. Once you get Madonna on the resume, it's pretty easy to start picking up other clients. We did that. And then the company size obviously grew. Um, and I would say probably, entertainment, if you add music and film together, 80% of our total revenues come from that now.
Wow. And how is his jujitsu? I heard it's pretty legit.
Yeah, Guy's great. Guy trained hard and he trained frequently, and he got his roles and he go to group classes. He take privates with really high level guys. In London, I know he was training with Hodger a lot. He was still coming back to New York and training with Henzo frequently. He's a talented dude.
Yeah, love his movies. And after you got Madonna on your resume, that you were staying pretty booked, I would imagine.
Yeah, that's that world is not different from protection or from military or law enforcement. Word of mouth is really important. So if she's saying I did a good job or he's saying did a good job, they're basically going to give you recommendations to other entertainers. Entertainers will ask, if it's actors, they're going to ask other actors. If it's musicians, they're going to ask other musicians, and so that's really the way in. For people that are interested in doing it. I can advertise all day. I wasn't even on social media until last year, and that was by necessity. We can have 1,000 websites and we can have millions of hits and we can have YouTube videos. None of that gets us jobs, not in that side. All of our work for the last 20 plus years has been through word of mouth, 100%.
Is there one type of client you prefer over another? For example, an actress over a rock star or a CEO over or anything like that?
No, I mean, if I'm being honest, and my clients know this about me, I'm very structure and detail oriented, and entertainers are not that. As a general rule, entertainers tend to be creative and without structure, and they like chaos, and some will insert things in order to get chaos. And so what it's done to me is it's forced me to be able to understand how that works and the variables in that particular equation. So I can either extract those variables or insert other variables that lead us down the right road. But I don't prefer chaos. I prefer structure and order. Unfortunately, the entertainment side is mostly chaos. So if I get an entertainer, I would prefer normally an older one. You have to understand when you're protecting someone, you essentially live their life. Whatever they're doing, you're doing. So if they're staying in the hotel 20 hours a day, you're staying in the hotel 20 hours a day. If they're out running around going to clubs, you're out running around going to clubs. So we can have a boy band like, we had One Direction and 5 Seconds of Summer. These guys are young kids and they're out for the first time. And imagine what you'd be doing if you were 19, 20, 22 years old and you had all this fame and money. You're going to run around and do things that young boys do, and that means you're going to be out all night. And then when a guy doing protection work has objectives, he has to get up early and start prepping things. Well, if you're out till 5 in the morning and you have a meeting at 8 o'clock in the morning, you got to be up at 7 in the morning. Over time, 2 hours of sleep, it doesn't work out so well. So those for me are less than ideal. And then trying to work out, whether it's jujitsu, Muay Thai, or lifting weights or running, you're not going to be doing a lot of that. So the client's going to dictate the pace of life and the activities that you do and what you see and where you go. Sometimes I'll get a client who likes to go visit sites. So we're going to go to the pyramids of Giza and we're going to go to the Eiffel Tower. We're going to go. And other times, like I said, we'll get old kind of legacy acts and they don't want to do anything. They've been around the world 10 times, 20 times, 100 times. They have no need to see anything or go anywhere. And you're locked in your hotel room in a foreign country. So, in that given country, you might know what the airport looks like, what the hotel looks like, what a venue looks like, and that's your life. So it depends. But executives for us are great. Diplomats are also great options for us.
Steve asked, he says, Todd, have you ever had a client who just wouldn't stay in the box, made it impossible to protect them?
Yes, yes, I have, and over time, if you can't modify behavior, you have to do an assessment and say, well, if these things that the client are doing, if these things can essentially come back and not harm me from a physical perspective, but harm me from a reputational perspective, it looks like I'm not doing my job. You have to kind of weigh that. And in some of the cases, you have to part ways and you have to be the one to choose that. And that's hard, I know, for guys that are starting out because maybe that's their sole income source, but it's not worth it. It's not worth it. If they're just completely and totally refusing anything you say, uh, for me at this juncture in my life, it's hey, good to meet you. I appreciate the opportunity, but this isn't a fit, and so I'm going to pass you off to another guy who's more appropriate for you.
I'm here in a couple of weeks. One of my best friends is going to come on, and he had a list actress that he managed for, was an EP guy for years. And one of the things that with him is she expected him to work 7 days a week, and I think probably in a year and a half he didn't have a single day off. And like you said, when the client moves, you got to move, and they don't want to hear that. Well, I haven't seen my kids in 6 months to a year.
Yeah, that's pretty much the norm in entertainment. When you look at the executive side, when you look at the dignitary side, if you look at military or PMC security, they have rotations. And on the entertainment side, they don't. It's a 24/7, 7 day a week thing. And you're just expected to be there because what does it mean to have another person? If you have another person to come in and do like shift work for that detail, who's paying for that? Right? It's not a big company. It's not the US government. It's that individual, and it's double the cost. And it's not just double the cost of the service. Now you've got to pay for flights, you've got to pay for hotels, you've got to pay for, ancillary things that are required. And when it comes down to it, they don't want to pay it. And therefore you're doing 100%. And that's what your friend experienced. And that's the norm for us.
Yeah, and I did. I was a colonel's driver when I was a young Marine, and so I got to go to high risk personnel course and all this stuff. And I took him overseas. So I've done a little bit of, but again, when you're in a foreign country carrying a concealed firearm, and the State Department knows you're there, and it's okay, and it's all cool, and you've got the government's paying the gas, the government's got your sedan covered. You arrive on the scene and everything's done. It's completely different. I would imagine, Todd, than when you're rolling solo out there.
Yeah, so one of the big factors there is guys come from the military and law enforcement, and they expect there's an infrastructure that's going to do all this stuff for them. And it just doesn't exist. So in our realm, we have to build the infrastructure, right? We have to do all the work ourselves to create the structure, and then we have to adapt or adjust the structure to fit the environment that we're in, and then also to fit our clients' needs and activities. And that's a big thing. And I've talked a little bit about this before too, but the truth is that over the years, what we've done is build this network of guys who basically have been vetted, who have been tested, and they know how we do business. And we get in briefs from them with respect to what's going on in the area, whether it's activities or something simple like construction next to a hotel, something simple like construction on a road, a major thoroughfare that we're going to use, or political activities in the area, or a plethora of things that exist. But building that infrastructure, having a trusted body, and then knowing what's going on, all that stuff is on us individually. We don't have a team that's going to go out and do that, meaning like a military team that's going to go out and spend 6 months there before we get there to set everything up. We don't have a snoop and poop team that's going to go over here and do this part of the work. They're going to do this leg and they're going to do that leg, and it doesn't work that way. We're picking flights. A lot of times we're dealing with private jets and FBOs. We're dealing with limo services, so we're picking vehicles and who the drivers are, and if the vehicles are up armored, and to what degree are they up armored? What are the TTPs of the local national criminals? Do they blow things up? Because that's going to change what kind of vehicle I need. Or do they shoot with small arms? So all of that stuff is done individually by us or collectively with a small team. We don't have the infrastructure support network that something like the military would or a PMC would.
Yeah, I like in your book you talk about, like the Glock and the AR system might be the most prevalent things in this country, but in Mexico it's something else. In Brazil it's something different. In the Ukraine it's something different. And one of the things that this one school I went to, I thought for protection did a real good job at, you would fight your way from one piece of cover to the next. And at each piece of cover, you would find a discarded weapon system. And it might be an AK at this barrel, and the AK would have some sort of stoppage. You had to know how to clear the stoppage or reload the firearm. And then the next would be some other foreign firearm. So I thought it was pretty cool.
Yeah, I agree with that format of training because you pretty much have what you bring with you when you go to a foreign country, and then you have what's available in that realm. And so part of what the intent of the book was to say, hey, it's your job to know what is standard in those areas, so that if you encounter that, you can utilize it. Let's say it's a weapon, it could be any other type of tool. If you know it's there and that it's readily available, and then you run into it, it's not a surprise, and you know how to let's say manipulate that piece of equipment. So that was the intent there. But I agree with that style of training. You okay? I got this thing now. Okay, how do I use it? Hopefully, you train for that in advance.
I want to shift gears back to Brazilian Jiu Jitsu with regard to training. Todd, do you, in the Jiu Jitsu community, there's gi and no gi. Do you have a preference over one? And if so, why?
I don't think I have a preference. We always I came up from day one doing both. Rodrigo Vaghi was a big fan of both. I would say that, overall we probably err toward gi, and I think the old adage is true, which is that the gi presents more opportunities. It's a more complex thing because you have more variables in the equations, more potential outcomes. So for learning, from my perspective, um, it's very useful. Also, I live in an area where it gets very cold in the wintertime, and I know it's true there as well. But I live in just outside of a major city, and people wear hoodies, people wear kind of parkas, people wear these things that are like kimonos. Some are much thicker than kimonos. And so you have to train to your environment. Now, if I'm in a very hot spot where they never wear that, okay, maybe there's less value. But what the gi teaches is angles and positions, and again, tools. It's a tool. How do you use that? So probably overall, if I had to pick, which I wouldn't, but if I had to pick, I would probably say it's better for training to be able to train with the gi on. I don't see a huge difference. I mean, my grips or handles or whatever don't change too much. They're in the same general area, whether you have a gi on or not. The big difference to me is just the pace of the fight and the slipperiness of the fight. So technically not too much changes. Without a gi, things are much faster because you can't slow it down with grips. And then without a gi on, you're not absorbing as much of the sweat, and so you tend to slip out of stuff or power through stuff a little bit more. So it's less technical, more athletic.
Yeah, they didn't offer wrestling where I went to high school, so it was one of those things. I didn't know any grappling until I started doing judo, because you remember line training really was no grappling, right?
No.
So I started doing judo, and so I fell in love with the kimono. And so to me, I probably err more on the gi because, again, as a cop, as a corrections guy, as a bouncer, I found that I could, people wearing coats, people wearing hoodies, people wearing vests back in the 90s. That was a thing, it was
Yes,
always
yes, it
something you could
was.
grab, you could always grab. We
Yeah.
got to go ahead, Todd. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's just a reality of life. Even if you're wearing a t-shirt, that can be utilized. So people walk around with clothing on. It makes sense to train with it. It also makes sense to train without it. If I don't know how many times I've seen in a fight where shirts come off. Either the guys voluntarily pull them off, or they try to do them hockey style and pull it over their head, and the shirt comes off. So you got to train both ways. I think it just makes sense. There are different environments, and you train for those different environments, and there are different conditions, and you train for those different conditions. So it makes sense. And in the old days, that's at least at my school's plural. It was always you train mostly gi in the winter and a lot of no gi in the summertime. And they did that a lot to do with heat, but also just general conditioning. And the conditions outside were mirrored in the gym. So when it's hot outside and people are wearing, flip flops and board shorts and wife beaters, you're training no gi. When it's cold outside and they're wearing parkas, you're training gi. So I think it's both.
Well, you and I talked a little bit about the some of the places that modern day, and I hate to say this, I hate to say this, sporting Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, competitive Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, how it is maybe not as contextually appropriate for self defense application. I'm going to be very kind with my words and choose them very carefully so people don't beat the crap out of me. But what are your thoughts on that, sir?
I am not a fan of things like the Berimbolo, of things like Turtle Guard. Uh, First of all, it doesn't work from my perspective. What the things that I want to do, and I'm not talking about point jujitsu. I don't care. Yes, I competed a lot in that, but I never thought about points. I never once compiled points. I didn't care about points. Even if I won by 2 points or 4 points, in my mind, I didn't win because I didn't get a submission. Um, And conversely, if a guy beat me by 2 points, he didn't beat me. So that's not how the game works, and I get that. And I get the value of something like Berimbolo or Turtle Guard for point jujitsu, but in the street, it's not real. It's not realistic for me. I don't want to be on bottom to begin with. Um, if I can be on top, I want to be there for the reasons that I've talked about in the past. But if you look at it just on a really basic level, you don't even want to be on the ground. As much as I love jujitsu, you don't want to be on the ground. Um, you think about the first component, which is that the ground is very hard, and no one I know consistently trains on hard surface spaces. They all train on mats or some variant of soft surface space. So yes, you can go out, and I do this on a semi-regular basis. We go out and we train in the snow, and we train on rocks, and we train on asphalt, but I do that in a very limited capacity, and usually I get hurt. I come back and then I'm bumped up and injured, and I have to nurse it for a while. So that's not realistic. So surface space is one issue. Another one for us, and this from being a Marine, is that you lose elevation, right? So I want to be up. I don't want to be down. If I want high ground, right? And that's the same. I want to be on my feet every day. I'm on my feet. I'm used to walking on my feet. I'm mobile. Again, another element, mobility. When I'm down on the ground, even if I'm mounted, I don't have a lot of mobility. If I'm on my back and the guy's on top of me, even if he's in my guard, I have almost no mobility. So I want to be able to disengage from the fight when I choose to disengage from the fight. Another thing, sight lines. I want to be able to see around me. I'm on the ground. It's going to be hard to see over a car or through a window or any other obstacle or obstruction. So, jiu-jitsu as a whole is a great martial art for one-on-one. I think for police or even some military components, it's the most realistic and the best thing. And it's my passion. I love it. But some of the components just aren't real. And so the modern day point system and the guys going upside down, inverting and then balling up, that's not for me. I'm not telling people they shouldn't do it. I don't think it's realistic. Even I do heel hooks and foot locks and knee bars. I do all of that stuff. But the thing is, I don't focus a lot on that. Why? Because if I'm dealing with protective services, or if I'm dealing with street components, or I'm dealing with something in a law enforcement capacity, I want to be high. I want to control their waistline in their hands. I don't want to be down at their feet, because if I'm down at their feet, anything in their waistline can come out to me very quickly, very easily, and unobstructed. It's not a great thing. Again, submission wrestling, it's great. MMA, it's great. You can't do that kind of stuff in gi jiu-jitsu, at least not in IBJJF. But I'm training for what I want to do, what my outcome needs to be for my goals. And so I think that's really the important thing. If you have guys that don't really care about the self-defense component, or not interested in training it, or they think their Berimbolo or Turtle Guard is going to beat guys that have, weapons, or, in a street scenario, that's fine. I'm not here to argue with them. I think it's very applicable to sport, but not very applicable to reality.
Well said. And next week, I believe it's next week, we're gonna have on Cecil Birch is coming back on, third degree black belt, with immediate action combatives and part of the Shivworks collective. And he is teaching a half guard seminar for self-defense right now. And I think those positions can be an intermediate position to get yourself to a better position. What do you think, Todd?
Half guard is an intermediate position, generally speaking, right? So
Yeah.
that it's a connecting point, right? It's a point where you get trapped. It's an entanglement that occurs when you're trying to transition from one point to another. Now, we know that many guys build their system to get to half guard to implement their sweep or submission from half guard. I see the value in it. I certainly wouldn't want that entanglement. And if I did, I'd be very cognizant of kind of which side I expose my gun to. And normally for us, think about this, like even if you went to something like a scissor position, right? Normally, most people reach to the collar with their strong hand. Most 87% of the population is right-handed. So I reach with my right hand to grab the collar, and then I grab either their sleeve or their knee or something else, and I've got my scissor with my right leg, the same as the top hand. Now, if I've got a gun on, let's say I'm a cop or I'm military or whatever else, and I go to that position, what side am I wearing my gun? And yes, so I just fed them that. Right. So it doesn't make sense from that perspective. So it depends on what you're training to. Now, half guard, if you're laying on your gun and you're doing half guard and you have an underhook or an overhook or a wrap and you're controlling legs and knees, I get it. But my goal would still be the same, to sweep and submit, to get to the top. I want to subdue. So yes, I think it's realistic in that it's a transition point between point A and point B that many people arrive at. So knowing that and training that as part of one small part of a much bigger thing makes sense to me.
And I know that we're getting a little technical this morning, and a lot of the folks that are joining us or will watch in the replays will probably be like, I don't know half of what you guys are talking about Berimbolo, but suffice it to say, listen to what Todd's saying when he's talking about using techniques that give you mobility, that give you height, that give you a good line of sight. So in that regard, are you a fan of knee on belly?
I love knee and belly, and
Love it.
I love it because my instructor did it a lot to me, and I know how useful it is. But more importantly, the reason I really love it is you have all of those things. So it puts you at the highest point in jiu-jitsu that you can be other than standing. It also gives you immediate access to your weapon, limits access to your weapon from your opponent, and it limits mobility to him. And then for cops, it also is a great point to transition for cuffing, but also dealing with multiple subjects at the same time. It's a very, very valuable position. And the beauty of knee and belly is it scores points in BJJ tournaments. It allows you to fight in MMA in terms of a dominant position. And then it works on the street. So I think that's one of the few positions that translates across the spectrum, from gi jiu-jitsu to combat sports to street. And it's a big part of the program. So we have a DT, a defensive tactics program that we teach and have been for a long time to a number of law enforcement agencies. I'm teaching a state agency next week, a 40-hour basic. And, a big part of that program is operating from knee and belly. So also another component to knee and belly for that side of things is you think about current politics and current civil unrest and issues with police. If your knee is in their belly, it's not on their neck. Yeah. And that looks much better aesthetically. And it functions, it's fantastic. The transitions that you can do from there are almost endless.
Well, and I'm glad you brought up the law enforcement context, because I don't know, Todd, if you saw the things that New York City's DT program has outlawed. Have you seen that?
Yeah, it's essentially no BJJ, no wrestling, no striking. You can't do anything. You have to ask the subject to put their own cuffs on and walk themselves to jail.
Yeah, I saw that. And if you haven't seen that and you're a combatives guy or gal, I encourage you to go watch that video, because it's shocking. And one of the things that the injuries to the officers are going to go through the roof, man. I remember, I always put my knees on the suspect, right? I don't put my knees on the ground. I put my knees on the suspect. And now they're like, no, you cannot put your knee on the suspect at all, which means, Todd, of course, the knees are going to be impacting asphalt day in and day out. And I just don't know how that's going to work, because I've seen officers really seriously injured doing that. What do you think?
I think it's unrealistic. I think everybody knows it's unrealistic. I think it's political. When you are dealing with violent or combative people, you cannot handle them with kid gloves. That's just a simple truth. Also, it's not just about hurting yourself. When you start to take away options from officers for soft techniques, those are soft techniques. You force them to their tool belt, which means you're escalating force through doing this. So I would think it's going to produce the opposite result. So aesthetically, they get the optics of saying, oh yeah, we're doing these things. We're taking this away from them and taking that away from them. And the reality is that you're forcing that officer to the tool belt. So they're going to either deploy OC or a taser quicker, or an ASP, or they're going to go to gun very quickly. And even if they don't choose to go there first, if you look at how quick the situation will physically escalate, that may be the only choice that's viable for them to go to, because they've let it get to a point, right? Because they weren't able to do anything that's preventive. And the whole point of something like situational awareness or environmental analysis is to understand, so you don't get to that point. And through taking away certain tools, you're almost forcing that situation.
I'm so glad you said that. I've said that on this show several times, and I'm so glad, Todd, that you're saying that, because people need to hear that. When you take those soft skills away, those soft tools away, you're going to the tool belt, and you're going to the tool belt a lot sooner than you should or could or would. And now, You're going to have suspects that get an escalated level of force that they didn't need to, injuries to the suspects. The city's going to have to pay out a lot of money, and it's not good for anybody. But like you said, they get the ability to have that beautiful optics of, hey, look what we've done for the community. We're going to make sure they don't do that to you.
Yeah, it's not realistic. It's just out of touch with reality. And I think anytime you have a citizen who gets to do some type of use of force training, they get to see very quickly the reality of life. And so I'm a big fan of those if they're run right. Um, Reality and politics are very seldom in alignment.
Yeah, Guile says, Todd, I'm just curious, does your job, EP, require you to carry a firearm, or is it all hand to hand?
No, it's a combination. So it depends on where we're at, what the threat level is, and then what the logistics or the admin or the legality of carrying is. So obviously, I think everybody knows that I'm a fan of firearms.
And as far as overseas deployment, is that normally unarmed?
No, it just depends. So overseas, it used to be back in the day, you could get what is the equivalent of a chit from a military general, let's say in South America or Africa, and you could legally carry. Now, whether that chit is honored by another general in another region, that's another thing. And usually, when we talk about Africa or we talk about South America or we talk about Southeast Asia, there's a lot of corruption. And so you're going to get hit. They call it the bite. You're going to get hit with the bite where everybody's going to be asking you for money. So normally, and this isn't any type of top secret information, but normally what happens is we would contract local guys who are authorized to carry, and they would be with us. And let's say they're with us and they have two guns. Well, that means if there's some type of engagement, you know that you have access to that weapon, that secondary weapon. So they're next to us and they have additional tools should they be needed. But that's the kind of workaround.
Yeah. TC says one good foot sweep on asphalt and your training day is likely over. Yeah.
Yeah, it happens to a lot of guys. I mean, I'm very conditioned. My body is very conditioned to being hit, and I hit the ground, and I'm going to tell you, it screws up my training day if I hit it at the wrong angle and the wrong time. And then when you look at pre-existing injuries on top of that, it's not a good way to train, especially as you get older. It's better to train smart and then limit. Yes, you need to do reality. So go out there and train on the pavement, go out and train in ice and snow and on rocks and in sand, but limited. It's got to be limited exposure.
Yeah. And one of the stories you talked about on, I believe it might have been Cleared Hot was, I think maybe an interesting story for those because it does deal with your job in, I think it was the story that with Tommy Lee.
Yeah. Yeah. So on Cleared Hot, interestingly, I told a bunch of stories. I told Andy, yeah, I'm going to talk about these things because it's becoming more prevalent. Guys are talking about it and I'm done. And these entertainers have talked about this. So I'll tell the story, but we were over in Eastern Europe and we were doing something we shouldn't have been doing, an event that was scheduled randomly, a private event. And in the end of the day, we were kept against our will by a group of people with AKs and a promoter who wanted his money back, and it didn't happen. But it was a comedy of errors because all the things that I wouldn't normally allow to happen had to happen. They controlled the ground movement, they controlled the air movement, they controlled the staging area, they controlled the event area, they controlled security. So they controlled all the components, which means they controlled everything, and that included my client and myself, and there was a drum tech and an assistant. But yeah, it ended up turning out okay thanks to a relationship with the State Department.
Yeah. I think the RSO, regional security officer, are invaluable assets in those
Yes,
cases.
sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Now, one of the things I wanted to go into, the current unrest in the world, specifically here in the United States, what has it taught us about the nature of conflict and conflict management, do you think, Todd?
There's an unlimited number of lessons with respect to what's occurring right now. I think one thing that jumps out to me is that you know the human component, right? The human component. Things are never final. Things are constantly changing, and we go through these cycles over and over and over again. And happiness. Like I hear people talk about utopia and this and that, and it's not the same. It's not one size fits all. So we're never going to be in a spot where every person agrees to exactly, how things should be. If you go to get ice cream and you have 30 options and you've got 30 people, they're not all going to pick the same flavor of ice cream. Everybody has a different utopia or different idea of what's right or just. So in human affairs, it's never final. It's constantly ongoing. Um, one thing too that I've learned, I've seen some things occur here now that I've seen overseas that I thought would never happen here. Um, it's an interesting time if you're paying attention. There's a lot of lessons to be learned. I don't necessarily want to get into any specific lessons because the viewers or listeners, have their own opinions, but uh, we certainly live in interesting times.
We do live in interesting times, and where again, I will refer back to your book as a really interesting place for folks that because I'll be quite frank with you, uh, in the training vault, if you're a member of the American Wear Society, and a lot of folks that are watching this will be, you're familiar with what we have in the training vault, but we don't have some of the things that are referenced in here, like what is key terrain, how to use it and exploit it, proximetrics, and I think it's the attacker, how they select targets and stuff like that. So there's a lot of interesting things that really I would encourage you to get the book. And since we're talking about it, Todd, where can they go to get that?
They can get it at tourprotection.com. They can get it at phaselinex.com. I'd prefer that anybody listening or watching gets it from tourprotection.com. You have to sell books on Amazon if you're selling books. So it's on Amazon. Amazon will take 50%. And, there are certainly other places you'd rather spend your money, I'm sure. Um, but that's the best spot. Tourprotection.com is my preference. And if you have an Amazon account and it's just easier for you and you don't care about where you spend your money, Amazon's a good option. Um, the book, back to kind of what you were getting at, the book has a few bits and pieces in there that you're talking about that are very um, relevant to modern times and what's going on without getting into any politics. The book is very kind of clean cut on that. But one of the things you had mentioned kind of was the equation, the criminal kind of equation with respect to them, a criminal, picking the time, the place, and the method of attack, and you getting to pick only the response. And everybody knows that generally speaking, action beats reaction. So you're behind the power curve. And then we talk about Klein's recognition prime decision making, which I don't know if you had any exposure to that in law enforcement or not. That's another component that applies today. You come to the fight with what you have in terms of tools, but also what's in your head, and your head is your primary weapon system, as you well know. So those components, same baseline anomaly, which comes from the Combat Hunter program. That's a really good system, I think, for what's going on right now, to be able to do very simple, basic, logical assessments of environments. Um, a lot of components, I think, cross over into your previous question.
Yeah, and it Left to Bang is an excellent book if you want to understand a little bit about the Combat Hunter program that Todd is referencing. I know that we've spoke about it at length. And matter of fact, one of my good friends, he's the colonel over the program out there. So
Nice.
yeah, your book. I mean, you talked a little bit about the beginning as to why you wrote it, but why do you think you chose what you chose to go in there? Because I mean, you could have taken a lot of different tactics with this. I mean, you obviously put a lot of thought into it. Is this something that, like, looking back on your life, these are the things you wish you knew before you got into it, or am I making more of it than I need to?
No, I think from my side of things, there were a couple components. One is that I finally had time because, as you noted earlier, we pretty much work 20 hours a day, 7 days a week, and that doesn't leave you with much time. And you want to attend to kind of more important things when you do have a little bit of time. So 2020 kind of freed up a little bit of time because all of our entertainment operations pretty much shut down. So we were left with dignitaries, executives, and some law enforcement training. Um, and I had a friend who I had worked through some, we'll call workplace issues, to help him kind of manage some things that were going on. And he had been telling me for a period of time, hey, man, you really need to send this information out. You really need to put it down somewhere, put it on a website, or do an app, or do a book, or whatever. And I'm not an app guy, so that wasn't going to happen. And then I kind of thought through, with respect to what was going on, if I'm teaching my family members, if I'm teaching my friends who don't know anything about this, what am I kind of constantly telling them, and how am I telling them it? And what systems are already existing and proven across time, not some new modern thing that I want to come up with, to stroke my ego. But I looked at those systems, and from my perspective, all the things that I put in the book are applicable to everyday life with the average person. And so I just thought through them, and some of them were not dumbed down, but some of them were simplified and made very basic just so that they would apply. But when I went through individually, I thought about what do I use when I'm not working, not just working, but what do I use when I'm not working? And everything that's in that book I use on a regular basis as a private citizen here in the US. It's a daily thing for me.
Yeah. And I'm frozen, by the way, but I think you can probably still hear me, right, Todd?
I got you loud and clear, Rich.
Yeah. Once again, I love living in the middle of nowhere, but it also has its drawbacks. And one of those is terrible Wi-Fi. I wanted to ask you,
Good
because you
trade-off,
mentioned,
by the way.
yeah, brother, it is. You mentioned how 2020 kind of affected your work and allowed you the opportunity to sit down and put a lot of this on paper. And I would ask you, looking back at 2020, looking forward into the future, you're someone that is very analytical, and it's one of the reasons I'm very excited to get you on the show. You're not just a knuckle dragger, but you're a very thoughtful person. Where is all this going if you were to look into Todd's crystal ball?
I wish I had an answer for that. I really wish I knew. I mean, everything that I see happening is not in alignment with reality, and it seems like people have pulled away from the center and having some general agreement and just gravitated toward extremes. At the end of the day, I think it starts with you and who you talk to and who you deal with, and who you surround yourself with, what tribe you create, what tools you have available to you. And so on my front, I can only tell you kind of what I'm doing. I'm dealing with it from that perspective because I don't know what the outcome's going to be. There's a lot of things that are occurring that, you know, I can't say I appreciate or I like or I love, but I can train and I can prepare myself for any eventuality. I can surround myself with people that are good, solid humans who I can trust if I need help or support. A big part of that too is the mental component. Just you're getting bombarded with all kinds of information and propaganda, and I think that takes a toll. And so having good, strong people around you who are smart, who are firm in their beliefs, but also who can, question things and look at information and sift through it and say, yeah, okay, I like these guys, but this is propaganda, or I don't like these guys, but this component is true. Um, that's been the thing for me throughout this whole period is there's a lot going on, and it's almost impossible to prove exactly what is and isn't true. So I kind of live my life pretty much the same way that I always lived it, and I try not to let it affect it to any high degree.
No, I think that's true. And I think I would agree with that. I mean, I was, training before all this craziness broke out. I'm going to keep training. I was doing a little bit of light prepping before this stuff happened. Guess what? I'm going to maybe buy a little bit more non-perishable foods. I think you're right. If you're already in this lifestyle, life for you probably doesn't change that much. But for those Americans, and I'm talking about the big part of the bell curve, that 80%, this was a wake up call, and I really hope they're paying attention.
I hope you're right, because obviously I want what's best for our country and fellow citizens. But you're also right on the side of prep, right? Like I'm not a prepper, I'm not paranoid about anything, but I get this all the time. Like, Todd, you're paranoid. No, actually I'm prepared. And because I'm prepared, I can live my normal life and I'm good. I'm ready for whatever can happen. And that's part of, in the book, I wrote about that in terms of three phases where you have to know what potential problems can occur, and then you have to see the possible solutions, and you have to be able to implement the correct response under stress. And that's true in fighting. That's true whether you're talking about jujitsu or gunfighting or even making decisions. So you have to know where the problems can come from. That's kind of what I use this time for, seeing where things are going, seeing what the end goal would be for entities and what they need to take to get to that point, and then what can I do to offset it? What can I do to allow me to live the lifestyle that I live now if these things were to occur? What would keep the people that I care about safe? And because of that, I don't feel the same level of pressure guys that aren't prepared do.
That's exactly right. And I hear this, and I'm interested in your take on it. One of the things that I travel to Europe. My wife and I and my family, we love to go there, and we go there quite often. And I'm a pretty well traveled guy, and from the Marine Corps and what have you. And people will say, "Man, you're going over there. You can't carry a gun over there." And I'm like, if all you have is that gun to make you feel like you're armed, air quotes, then you need to reevaluate yourself, brother, because one of the things that I'll use you as an example, Todd, you can take the gun away from Todd Fox, but guess what? You cannot take away every time you stood in the ring toe to toe with somebody, every time you bit down on that mouth guard and punch somebody. I mean, I think that being armed is a hell of a lot more than having a gadget in your pocket. What do you say?
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I try to make that point in every class that we have, which is that your brain is the primary weapon system, right? Your mindset. You don't need a gun to win a fight. The gun is just an extension of the mind if you're using it right. And a lot of situations I don't have a gun if I'm in the shower, if I'm asleep, or they're traveling overseas without a gun is not the end of the world. It's just that we become so dependent, so reliant on that tool, and we don't use the primary tool, which is the brain, to deal with the issues. And another thing that you're talking about when you reference the ring, jujitsu and all combat martial arts, especially jujitsu, especially Muay Thai, especially boxing, especially wrestling, these are exposures that I've talked about. These are repeated exposures. And every time that you finish one, there's another one waiting for you. So the fight is never over. And that's pretty much how life works. It's not like things are going to get perfect and then they're going to stay perfect. It doesn't work that way. And so these trainings are conditional, right? They condition your mind, their preparation. Each exposure makes you a little bit stronger. And that's why you're doing it. It's not to have a gun to shoot. A single gun is not going to solve your problem every time. It's just a tool. It's good to have. It's better to have than not have. 100%. Big fan. I believe in it, but I'm not done without it. That doesn't make sense. That mindset doesn't make sense. And to panic without it, again, that doesn't make sense. So I agree with you 100%.
Yeah. And Gerald says reality is we all get older and we have to be smart. And I think that's what Todd has said multiple times this morning. And that is, the most important thing you got is that 6 inches of space between your ears. And if that isn't where it needs to be, there's no amount of secret sauce that's going to help you with that. I think that's what you're saying a lot more eloquently than I just did.
Yeah, absolutely. You think about that. Everybody talks about this and like, yeah, what about this pill and that pill? And what about this training course and that training course? And what about this weapon and that weapon? And the truth is, you're wearing your weapon in your head, and you doing training is what is making that weapon better or more efficient or more resilient. And that needs to be the objective or goal, at least for me. And if you're around me, normally that's kind of how you think. And it sounds like, Rich, from our conversation, that you're in that same headspace.
Yeah. One mind, any weapon, brother.
Yes, sir. That's a close combat instructor motto.
That's right. Yeah, I want to be respectful of your time, Todd. We've had you on here for quite a long time. If anybody has a question for Todd, you might want to get it out there now, because I want to get him onto his day. I'm sure he's got a lot of stuff going on. Alan Kelly says, and Alan's a retired state trooper. He says, "Good point. The brain is your number one tool in your bag of options." I agree with that 100%. Steve says, "What is the saying? Improvise and overcome." Yeah, something like that.
Where's the adapt, buddy?
Yeah, adapt. Got to adapt. TC says, "Good show, gents." And also, if you want to check out Todd's book, and he mentioned torprotection.com, that is in the show notes. All you got to do is go to the show notes and everything is there. I think I put another link to another website that you're involved in as well. If folks wanted to train with you, Todd, where would they need to go for that?
PhaseLineX.com. Phase, PHASE, line, LINE, X, the letter, .com. And there's a tab in the top right hand corner. So if you're looking on your phone, there's a tab in the top right hand corner that has two small lines, very hard to see, and you can pull down to training. If you're on your desktop, it should populate in a way that you can see training pretty easily.
And one of the things that somebody's asking, Gerald is asking, one of the things we sometimes do with our guests is ask, what was your best day, worst day? And if you don't mind sharing that with us, Todd, we'd love to hear
Oh,
that.
I'm glad Gerald asked that question because I haven't really thought too much about that. Um, I I was dealing with an issue overseas that was a very nasty issue in the Middle East, and I got a phone call that my dad died, and then I had to come back however many hours, and that was a mess. And I think for me, having lost a lot of people, that was the most significant loss. But it was compounded. Uh, there's so many scenarios that I can think of that were bad days, but so many that were good. And best day, I don't know. I've been fortunate to be surrounded by good people, have had good instructors, good mentors, a strong family. Uh, I've had a lot of good days. I don't even know where you begin when you're blessed with so many good things. But Jared, I'll think about that, and next time I do a show, I will come back with an answer for that.
Yeah, I'd love to hear that. And I kind of feel the same way. I've been blessed to have the same wife for 33 years, had a great career in the Marine Corps, and I guess I just soloed under a lucky star or something. But I want to circle back to something because it was something that you said a minute ago, like the gun is the extension of your will, and I love that because I look at every tool from the mind to the way I communicate with my body or my mind, and I think that one of the things that being a recruiter for so long, and they send us to a lot of really good training, as you know, is that my ability to communicate is probably one of the most misunderstood and underutilized self-defense tools we have. And I just every day I'm surprised by the lack at which we do in training folks to communicate with their bodies, to communicate with their words, to understand the all the little things that are going on in your environment and how communications can really help you. Can you talk to that at all, Todd?
Yeah. First of all, let's start with where you started, which was kind of everything starting in the head. And you know, if you guys get a chance, there's a guy named Andrew Huberman who's a neuroscientist who puts out a lot of material on neuroplasticity. And if you guys want to learn something, if you want to grow, he'll give you some shortcuts on how to do that. Now, shortcuts don't mean it's easy; it just means it's a shorter way. But one of the things that he talks about a lot is kind of your eyes being an extension from your brain, literally connected to your brain, and how it works and why it's there and all these great things. But think about anything you've done. I mean, if you've done anything at all, whether you're building a house or anything else, the first thing is it has to occur in your mind. It can't happen without occurring in your mind first. Your eyes have to see it, transfer it to your brain. Your brain goes through whatever information you have available to you and makes a decision based on past experiences. And during that time, you're dealing with the adrenal response, which produces all these physiological responses to stress. And then you produce this result that you've trained for or haven't trained for. Hopefully you have. Um, and I think that's lost on a lot of people. They think it's just this physical thing. Well, the physical thing can't happen without your brain. And so, really, training your brain is the best way. And again, I know I've said this 3 or 4 times now, but exposures, repeated exposures to really basic things across time will produce results under stress. So, I agree with you, Rich. Being able to talk to people, being able to communicate people, that's huge. Because I travel so much, the big thing for me is cultural context, like understanding what environment I'm in, understanding what they think, what they believe. Um, we spend a lot of time in Mexico and kind of understanding how things work there and how people connect and how people communicate. I can understand what the baseline is and then I can apply it so that I can integrate into it better. Now I'm going to stand out like a sore thumb, but at least if I know how to communicate to those people on their level, talk about the things they talk about, hear things the way they hear it, my body posturing, my hand positioning, my eyes, um, you know, simple things. Even when we talk about stuff like going to the Middle East and I've got an issue with a woman, I don't go talk to the woman. I go talk to her husband or her brother or her son or someone else, and then he talks to her. But knowing that kind of stuff prevents a ton of problems from occurring. So, again, getting back to it, research and studying and thinking and questioning and having experiences, all that stuff comes down to, again, what you're presenting. Like in your case, you're talking about communication and I think preventive skills so that you never have to get to that point where it becomes bad.
No, that's exactly right. And Todd, any final thoughts this morning before I let you go?
No, I love that your guys here are committed at this time in the morning and paying attention to this kind of stuff. I'm definitely going to be following you and paying attention to what you got going on. I hope I get down there to Tennessee. I love Tennessee, man. It's a great place, and hopefully you and I can link up and roll around a bit and do some shooting.
I'd love to, man. I know Mike Seeklander, my business partner, would love that as well. And we look forward to that someday, Todd. And those of you that are out there today watching the show, please check out Todd's book, Protection for and from Humanity. You will not regret it. And Todd, it's been a pleasure having you on the show, sir. And I look forward to rolling with you someday.
Absolutely, Rich. Thank you, sir.
All right, guys, stay safe out there. And remember, the fight is coming. Be ready.